They were powerful, strange, or just plain dangerous. And they scared regulators, outraged the public, or broke the rules so badly they had to be banned. These aren't myths. These are real American cars that automakers built, then tried to erase. No ads, no museum displays, just silence. Here are 12 banned American cars so wild the companies behind them hope you never find out they existed. Close your eyes for a moment and picture this. It's late 1969. The air is crisp, leaves scatter across a cracked asphalt lot, and tucked between rows of dusty sedans and unsold Coronets sits something otherworldly. It doesn't look like a car, not exactly. The nose juts out like the tip of a missile. The rear wing towers above the roofline, absurdly high, high enough to make you stop mid-step and stare. It's long, it's loud, it's ludicrous, and it's very, very real. That is the 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona. It wasn't just built to be fast. It wasn't designed for comfort or commuting. No, the Daytona was engineered to do one thing and one thing only: annihilate NASCAR. And for a brief, blazing moment, it did. To understand why this car existed at all, we need to go back to the trenches of late 1960s stock car racing, back when NASCAR was a knife fight with engines. Ford had just unleashed the Torino Talladega. Mercury brought the Cyclone spoiler. And Dodge had lost. Badly. They were sick of playing fair. So, in a boardroom thick with cigar smoke and desperation, someone at Dodge must have stood up and said, "Fine, let's build a missile." And they did. They took the already potent Charger 500 and pushed it into another dimension. First came the nose, a hand-fabricated 18-inch aerodynamic cone sculpted in a wind tunnel, slicing the air like a fighter jet. Then came the rear. Not just a spoiler, but a full-blown stabilizer wing, mounted above the trunk, designed to keep the rear tires glued to the pavement at speeds previously thought impossible. Every curve, every crease was crafted with pure function in mind. This wasn't styling. It was science. Speed science. The result? History. The Charger Daytona became the first NASCAR car to officially break the 200 mph barrier. In 1969, let that sink in. 200 miles per hour in a car, with carburetors, bias-plied tires, and drum brakes. It didn't just beat the competition, it humiliated them. And yet, because of NASCAR's homologation rules, Dodge had to build at least 500 of these beasts for the street. That meant the general public could buy one. In theory, what arrived in Dodge showrooms across America looked like something that had escaped from a top-secret Air Force hangar. On city streets, it was ridiculous. The nose scraped on driveways. The rear wing blocked the view in the rearview mirror. Parking it was like docking a yacht. And still, some brave souls bought them because they wanted to feel what racing felt like, because they wanted to own a street-legal piece of outlaw machinery, because it made a statement. You didn't just drive a Daytona, you announced your existence to the world. But here's the twist. The Daytona wasn't just powerful, it was too powerful. NASCAR took one look at what Dodge and Plymouth had unleashed and essentially said, "Yeah, no, we're not doing this." New rules were introduced in 1971 that crippled the wing cars. Restrictions on engine sizes for aerodynamic vehicles effectively killed the Daytona's racing future. Overnight, the car went from championship contender to forbidden relic. And the street cars? Dealers couldn't give them away. Some sat unsold for months. Stories abound of brand new Daytonas being discounted below cost, offered with free floor mats, window tinting, anything just to move the inventory. People didn't know what to do with them. They were too weird, too fast. And then, the Daytona vanished. Decades passed, Dodge moved on. New models came, old names died. The Daytona became a ghost, barely mentioned in press kits, rarely seen in corporate collections. Dodge never disowned it exactly, but they certainly didn't celebrate it either. Not openly, but to those who know, to the gearheads, the historians, the dreamers, the 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona became something more than a car. It became legend. It was the mechanical embodiment of rebellion, A car that broke records, broke rules, and broke the mold. Today, surviving Daytonas are priceless. Six-figure auction darlings, museum pieces, crown jewels of any collection. Fewer than 505 street versions were built, and even fewer remain in original condition. Each one is a time capsule from an era when Detroit dared to reach too far, too fast, and made something unforgettable in the process. Because the Charger Daytona wasn't just fast, it was revolutionary, it was outrageous, it was banned, and that's why we remember it. This wasn't a muscle car, it was a guided weapon on wheels, a thunderclap of steel, fuel, and defiance. It didn't whisper its intentions, it screamed them. The 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona, too wild to live, too fast to forget. A car that came from nowhere, broke the rules of racing, and disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. And if you ever see one in person, sitting quietly in a garage or thundering past at a car show, just remember. Now picture this. It's the spring of 1971 and you're standing in the polished showroom of a Chevrolet dealer. The sales floor smells like fresh rubber and ambition. And sitting there beneath the fluorescent lights is something different, something mean. It looks like a regular Corvette, long hood, swooping curves, that unmistakable Coke bottle shape. But there's something in the air, a quiet tension. Like the room knows this car doesn't belong. It's a 1971 Chevrolet Corvette ZR2, and it is one of the rarest, rawest, and most misunderstood monsters ever to wear a bow tie badge. Now let's set the scene. Chevy in the early 70s was riding high. The Corvette was America's sports car, no doubt. Sleek, fast, desirable. But there was a war brewing in Detroit. One last gasp before emissions controls and insurance regulations would choke the life out of high-performance muscle. Chevy had already cooked up the ZR1, a small block, track-bred Corvette package for purists. But someone, somewhere deep inside GM's engineering department, must have asked the one question no one else dared ask. What happens if we take the best handling Corvette we've ever built and drop a 454 cubic inch LS6 big block into it? And the answer? You get the ZR2. On paper, it was madness. A 425 horsepower LS6 V8, one of the most brutal engines Chevrolet ever made, shoved into a lightweight track-prepped chassis with upgraded suspension, aluminum radiator, heavy-duty brakes, and a Muncie M1022 rock crusher 4-speed transmission. No power steering, no air conditioning, no frills, just heat, noise, and pure unfiltered venom. It was a racing car with license plates, and it scared people, not just the average Sunday driver, but insurance companies. They refused to touch it. Dealers didn't know how to sell it. Executives didn't know what to do with it. So Chevy did nothing. No brochures, no advertisements, no magazine tests, no press kits. They quietly built 12. Just 12. That's it. 12 street-legal ZR2 Corvettes. Ever. It was never meant to be a showroom darling. It wasn't for posing or parading. It was a machine built for the track, for people who knew exactly what they were buying and didn't need flashy slogans to convince them. These were cars for racers, not collectors. Weapons, not trophies. And because GM never promoted the ZR2, it faded into obscurity almost immediately. Even within Corvette circles, it became a whispered legend. No museum displays, no birthday tributes, just a footnote, a did you know buried beneath decades of fiberglass history. But make no mistake, this was not some corporate fluke. This was Chevrolet at its most unhinged, its most defiant. A company that knew the horsepower party was coming to an end and decided to go out with a cannon blast. The ZR2 wasn't refined, it wasn't polite. It was a barely contained detonation, a torque-loaded Leviathan waiting to lurch off the line and fry the rear tires before the tatch even hit 3,000. It handled better than a big block should, because it had to. The engineers made damn sure of that, but it was still a beast you had to wrestle, not just drive. And then, like smoke from a burnout, it was gone. No follow-up, no successor. GM pulled the plug quietly, without ceremony. The ZR2 was too powerful, too expensive, and, perhaps most importantly, too dangerous for the direction America's roads and laws were heading. It was a dinosaur screaming into a meteor. Today, the ZR2 is the ultimate Corvette ghost story. Most enthusiasts have heard of the ZR1. Some know the ZR6. But the ZR2? That's another level entirely. It's the kind of car whispered about at swap meets and high-dollar auctions. A unicorn made of chrome and fury. So if you're lucky enough to ever see one, in a garage, a show, or God forbid, actually driving, stop and take it in. You're not just looking at a Corvette, you're looking at the last time Chevrolet let its engineers completely off the leash. A brief, brilliant flash before regulations dimmed the lights. The 1971 Chevrolet Corvette ZR2, untamed, unmarketed, unmatched. A car that was never supposed to exist, and one you'll never forget. Now imagine this. It's May of 1984 and all eyes are locked on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. The air trembles with the roar of engines and the scent of race fuel. The pace car rolls onto the track, decked in white and adorned with red and silver graphics, a sleek wedge of futuristic fiberglass with pop-up headlights and an impossibly low stance. It's the 1984 Pontiac Fiero Indy pace car, and it looks like the future. Except the one pacing the Indy 500, that wasn't the car you could buy at your local Pontiac dealer. No, that one, the real one, was a mid-engine, turbocharged, fire-breathing prototype that turned heads and dropped jaws. It wasn't some marketing gimmick. It was the dream version. The real Fiero, unshackled from cost-cutting and compromise. A one-off beast built not to please the accountants, but to race. Underneath that fiberglass skin was an experimental, turbocharged 2.0-liter four-cylinder, developed with help from Lotus, cranking out a then-astonishing 232 horsepower. In a car that weighed just over 2,500 pounds, that meant serious speed. Way beyond the capabilities of the 92 horsepower commuter coupe Pontiac was peddling to the public. The transmission? Modified. The suspension? Reworked. The goal? Prove that Pontiac could build a world-class mid-engine performance car. And for a fleeting moment, they did. On race day, that turbocharged Fiero prototype thundered around the brickyard at over 130 mph. It looked like the future of American performance. Angular, exotic, efficient. The crowds went wild. The press leaned in. The public started asking, "When can I buy that one?" Pontiac heard them, and for a brief second, it looked like the fantasy might actually become real. A handful of turbo prototypes were constructed. Rumors swirled about a future production version. But behind the scenes at GM, storm clouds were gathering. Engineers had concerns. The Fiero suspension, borrowed from GM's front-wheel drive econoboxes, wasn't designed for this level of power or speed. Its peculiar geometry, especially in early models, made high-speed handling unpredictable, sometimes dangerously so. Add turbo lag, a twitchy mid-engine layout, and GM's infamous cost-cutting measures, and you had a cocktail that corporate lawyers wanted nothing to do with. And just like that, the dream was dead. No production turbo Fiero, no wide-body Indy replica with real performance, no transformation from commuter car to Corvette fighter. GM shut it all down, silently, surgically. The few turbo prototypes quietly vanished into storage or the hands of collectors. Pontiac was ordered back into its lane. So what did the public get instead? The showroom Indy Fiero was mostly stock, a dressed-up version of the base car with the same 92 horsepower Iron Duke four-cylinder that struggled to get out of its own way. It looked fast. It sounded fast. But underneath, it was a glorified economy car in a Halloween costume. And that's the tragedy of the Fiero Indy Turbo. It was never just a styling exercise. It was a glimpse of what Pontiac could have been. Bold, daring, ahead of its time. It was a car that proved Detroit could build something exotic, something that didn't copy Europe, but stood toe-to-toe with it. And then corporate fear snuffed it out. Today, only a few turbo Indy Fieros exist. They're museum pieces, whispers of a future that never came to be. Most people will see the production Fiero and laugh. Plastic panels, low power, bad press. But they don't know the whole story. They don't know that once, just once, Pontiac built a car that scared the Corvette guys. A car that could have changed everything. The 1984 Pontiac Fiero Indy Turbo was more than a prototype. It was a rebellion, a middle finger to the notion that American cars had to be safe, slow, and predictable. It was dangerous. It was flawed. But it was alive. And that's exactly why GM buried it, because it dared to be better than what the company was willing to allow. So if you ever see one, tucked in a private collection, sitting quietly at a car show, or collecting dust behind museum glass, take a long, hard look. You're not looking at a failure, you're looking at what could have been. Now imagine this, it's the early 1960s. The jet age is in full swing. Commercial airliners are crisscrossing the country. NASA is preparing to send men to the moon. Everything, from toasters to tail fins, is being shaped by the promise of a sleek, high-tech future. And in the middle of all this, Chrysler, of all companies, does something absolutely insane. They build a car with a jet engine. Not a jet-like engine, not a gimmick. A real turbine spinning at up to 60,000 RPM, bolted into a luxury coupe that looks like it drove straight out of a Buck Rogers comic. It was called the 1963 Chrysler Turbine Car, and it might be the most daring automotive experiment the world has ever seen. Let's be clear, this wasn't a concept car locked away in a glass box. Chrysler built 55 of these things, and then they handed the keys to regular people. No contracts, no gimmicks, just a loaner program. Drive it, live with it, take it to the grocery store, see what the future feels like. And the future, it was weird and wonderful. The Chrysler Turbine Car didn't need oil changes. It didn't need coolant. There were no pistons, no spark plugs, no radiators. It didn't stall, didn't vapor lock, didn't care how cold it was outside. It started every time, without hesitation, with a strange rising whine, like a jet spooling up on the runway. It idled with a high-pitched hiss, then launched forward with a whoosh, like a vacuum cleaner from another dimension. And the fuel? It could burn anything. Diesel, kerosene, paint thinner, perfume, even tequila. One test driver famously said, "If it burns, the turbine will eat it." This was more than a car. It was an idea, a rolling experiment, a rebellion against the complexity and fragility of piston engines. A machine designed to be smooth, simple, and durable, like the future was supposed to be. And the best part? People loved it. Families drove them. Teenagers cruised in them. There are stories of owners showing up at gas stations and drawing crowds just to hear that eerie turbine whine. Some put thousands of miles on them during their test period and begged Chrysler to let them keep the car. But that's not how this story ends, because the government was watching, and they were nervous. You see, the turbine car had quirks. Its exhaust was hot, really hot, enough to melt the bumper off the car behind you if you weren't careful. It made strange, alien noises that regulators thought would frighten pedestrians. And although it could run on almost any fuel, it didn't sip it. The turbine engine was thirsty, not terribly efficient at low speeds, not ideal for city use, but more than anything, it was a threat, not just to the status quo, but to the deeply entrenched industries that had grown around the conventional internal combustion engine. Emissions testing? Obsolete. Traditional maintenance? Irrelevant. Oil industry control? Complicated. The turbine engine wasn't just unconventional, it was uncontrollable. So the hammer came down. Chrysler was under pressure, financial, political, regulatory. They had spent millions developing this car, shipping it across the country, dreaming of a turbine-powered lineup. But Washington didn't like what it saw, and neither did the suits at GM and Ford. Behind the scenes, the car was quietly strangled by bureaucracy, economics, and fear. And then came the worst part. When the program ended in 1966, Chrysler recalled all 55 turbine cars, 55 shining golden bronze machines, 55 pieces of the future. 9 were sent to museums. The other 46? Crushed, destroyed, annihilated. reduced to shards of fiberglass and powdered steel under the crushing jaws of corporate regret. The destruction wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. It was strategic. Some say it was to avoid import taxes, since the bodies were hand-built by Ghia in Italy. Others believe it was to prevent anyone from studying, copying, or, worst of all, driving them again. And just like that, the future was gone. Today, only 9 turbine cars survive. Most are locked away in museums under strict, no start, no drive orders. A few run, but they are kept like artifacts, sacred relics of a path not taken. Even Chrysler in its later years barely acknowledged the project. There were no commercials, no anniversary editions, no corporate pride, just silence. But if you ever see the one in person, that low bronze body with the turbine-style taillights and twin exhaust ports, remember this: it's not just a car, it's a ghost from an alternate timeline where cars didn't chug and sputter, but whistled. Where engines didn't die every 100,000 miles, but spun effortlessly for decades. Where gasoline wasn't king and maintenance was a memory. The 1963 Chrysler Turbine Car wasn't a failure. It was a warning of what was possible and of how quickly the possible can be crushed into the dirt when it threatens the powerful. Close your eyes and picture this. It's the summer of 1970 and the American muscle car war is peaking. Showrooms roar with supersports, GTOs, Roadrunners, and Mach 1s. Every manufacturer is swinging for the fences. It's chrome, cubes, and quarter-mile times. And in the middle of all this chaos, a quiet rebellion is brewing in the unlikeliest of places. The American Motors Corporation. That's right, AMC, the underdog, the budget brand, the guys known for gremlins and ramblers. But they had a secret weapon, a wild-eyed red, white, and blue brute that showed up like a sucker punch to the jaw of the big three. It was called the AMC Rebel, the machine, and it was no joke. Officially, this beast came with a 390 cubic inch V8 pushing 340 horsepower. It had a factory Ram air scoop, racing stripes, beefy suspension, and an attitude that could make a Chevelle SS flinch. It was AMC's middle finger to every magazine editor who ever called them boring. But what most people don't know, what even most muscle car fans don't know, is that the machine had a forbidden underground version. A version that shouldn't have existed. One that, for a brief, fiery moment, made the Rebel the most dangerous muscle car in America. It started with a few rogue dealers, the kind of guys who tuned cars after hours and didn't care what corporate said. They looked at the machine and said, "This thing's good, but what if we made it insane?" And so, behind AMC's back, they did the unthinkable. They started dropping Pontiac 400 Ram Air 4 engines into Rebel machines. Yes, Pontiac, as in GM. These weren't crate motors. These were real deal, high compression, big port, fire-breathing monsters, yanked from wrecked GTO judges, sourced from racing connections, and stuffed under the Rebel's hood with a wink and a dare. It was heresy. It was brilliant. The result? A Frankenstein muscle car that embarrassed almost everything else on the road. GTOs? Toast. Chevelles? Left in the dust. Even the Mighty Boss 429 and Hemi Chargers were suddenly looking over their shoulders. The Ram Air 4 had 370 rated horsepower on paper, but everyone knew it was closer to 420. Maybe more. Combined with the Rebel's relatively light weight and AMC's no-frills performance tuning, it was a street assassin in red, white, and blue war paint. These cars didn't just run, they hunted. But the dream didn't last. Word got out. Whispers turned into rumors. AMC's legal department caught wind of these unauthorized hybrids. Heads started to turn. The brass wasn't amused. You see, AMC didn't have the luxury of dancing around corporate violations. They were already walking a tightrope just to survive. If GM had wanted to, they could have sued AMC into the grave for misusing Pontiac parts. It was a PR disaster waiting to happen. So AMC acted fast and quietly. Internal memos were shredded. Dealer service bulletins vanished. AMC agents, yes, real corporate reps, were sent out to track down the rogue machines. Some were bought back. Others were confiscated. A few were mysteriously lost in shipping accidents. Several, it said, were taken straight from dealer lots to scrap yards under cover of darkness. Not because they were bad cars, but because they were too good, too powerful, too rebellious. AMC scrubbed them from existence. No ads, no mentions, no paperwork. By 1971, it was like it never happened. But it did happen. Ask the right people, old racers, retired dealers, lifelong AMC nuts, and they'll tell you stories. Stories of rebel machines that roared like GTOs, revved like race cars, and walked away from the kings of Woodward Avenue like they were standing still. And if you ever see one, a Rebel with mismatched motor mounts, maybe a suspicious VIN, maybe something not quite right under the hood, you might be looking at one of the last surviving outlaw machines. One of the few that slip in through the corporate dragnet, a living ghost of a muscle car that AMC tried to erase. Because the 1970 AMC Rebel, the machine, wasn't just a performance car. For a brief, glorious moment, it was the most feared street fighter in Detroit, a renegade with the heart of a Pontiac and the soul of a rebel. In AMC, they buried it. They had to. Because if the world had known that the little underdog from Kenosha had just built the fastest factory hot rod in America, with help from their arch rival, no less, the whole game might have changed. But they made sure the world never knew. Let's go back to 1957. Not the sock-hop, poodle-skirt version of 1957 you see in commercials, but the gritty, tire-smoking, risk-taking Detroit of the atomic age. America was booming. Jet engines were redefining speed. Engineers were gods. Corporate executives still smoked in meetings. And the big three were locked in a silent, savage war to claim not just the street, but the future. At Chevrolet, one man had a vision that would terrify the boardroom and electrify a generation. Zora Arkus Duntov. He wasn't your typical GM lifer. He was a refugee, a racer, a former test driver for Allard and Porsche, and he believed that the Corvette, then dismissed as a pretty face with no muscle, could become a world-class racing machine. Not just a boulevard cruiser, not just America's sports car, but a killer. Something that could line up at Le Mans and beat the Europeans at their own game. And so was born XP64, the 1957 Chevrolet Corvette SS. Not a trim package, not a concept car. This was a full-blown experimental prototype built to do one thing: win Sebring and then take on Le Mans. It was hand-built from the wheels up in just 6 months. Every ounce, every inch, every bolt was engineered for speed. The body was magnesium alloy, an exotic ultralight material so rare and volatile it practically caught fire if you looked at it wrong. Beneath it, the frame was a tubular, space-age lattice designed for maximum rigidity and minimum weight. Inside that frame, Chevrolet dropped a high-compression, fuel-injected 283 cubic-inch small-block V8, one of the very first American engines to break the mythical 1 horsepower per cubic-inch barrier. It made over 300 horsepower in a car that weighed just 1,850 pounds. Do the math. That's modern supercar territory in 1957. But it didn't stop there. The Corvette SS featured a 4-speed manual transmission, magnesium Halabrand wheels, independent front suspension with coil springs, and enormous finned aluminum drum brakes. It even had a De Dion rear suspension layout, unheard of in American production cars at the time, and it looked like something out of a sci-fi comic. Long, low, brutal, twin bubble windscreens, an exposed roll hoop, exhaust that ran along the sides like artillery barrels. It didn't look like a car, it looked like a jet fighter without wings. But in their obsession with speed, the engineers had overlooked something basic, something fatal: heat. During the shakedown runs at Sebring, test driver John Fitch strapped himself into the car, not knowing he was about to step into what amounted to a rolling furnace. The engine, barely separated from the cockpit, dumped relentless heat into the cabin. The floor pan began to sear. The fiberglass seat started to warp and bubble. Smoke curled up from the footwell. At speed, the heat was unbearable. Even the seat mounts began to soften from thermal expansion. Fitch's shoes began to melt. His racing suit clung to him with sweat. He was roasting alive inside a magnesium missile. He barely got the car back to the pits before it cooked him. It was a catastrophic oversight. GM had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars building a weapon of war and forgotten to check if a human being could survive inside it. And then, like a twist of fate, came the death blow. The American Manufacturers Association issued a directive banning direct factory involvement in motorsports. No more racing, no more prototypes, no more dreams of Le Mans glory. GM, desperate to maintain a clean public image and terrified of government antitrust action, folded almost overnight. The Corvette SS, the machine that was supposed to lead a racing revolution, was now illegal. Sebring 1957 would be its one and only public appearance. It completed just 23 laps before retiring due to brake failure and electrical issues. It never returned to competition. After that, XP64 vanished. No press releases, no follow-up program. The car was quietly tucked away into storage, hidden in the back corners of GM's private collection like a guilty secret. It became a whisper, a phantom, a cautionary tale. Corvette historians would spend decades piecing together the full story, unearthing old photographs, internal memos, and first-hand accounts. What they discovered was astonishing. The Corvette SS wasn't just a failed race car, it was a silenced revolution. It was America's answer to Ferrari, Jaguar, and Maserati, and it came just a hair's breadth from changing the course of motorsport history. If it had worked, if it had survived the heat, if the rules hadn't changed, America might have stormed Le Mans 10 years early. The Corvette racing legacy we know today, from the C5R to the C8R, could have started in the Eisenhower era, not the Reagan years, but instead, XP64 was buried. One car, built, driven, shelved. Today, it still exists, one of one, a museum piece, a molten silver sculpture that looks too fast for its own era. Imagine this. It's the dawn of the 1990s. American highways are clogged with jelly bean-shaped sedans, and police cruisers are mostly clunky Caprices and aging diplomats barely capable of catching a speeding Supra. High-speed chases were getting riskier, and departments needed something faster, something invisible. That's when General Motors quietly developed a wolf in the blandest sheep's clothing imaginable. The Y1990 Chevrolet Lumina Euro 3.4 twin dual-cam police prototype. It looked like a car your aunt would drive to bingo night. 4 doors, bench seats, cloth interior, not a hint of aggression. But under that anonymous exterior hid something almost sinister, a street-legal interceptor bred in secret. The goal? Build an uncatchable ghost on wheels, a stealth pursuit vehicle, something that could blend into traffic until it pounced. And what they stuffed under the hood wasn't ordinary. The engine was the new LQ1 3.4-liter twin dual-cam V6, a joint project between GM's Performance Division and Lotus Engineering. It was a 60-degree aluminum V6 with 4 camshafts, 24 valves, and a screaming red line near 7,000 RPM. With 210 horsepower and 215 lb of torque, high numbers for the era, it gave the Luminina the kind of legs no other mid-size sedan had. It could do 0 to 60 in under 7 seconds. And on a long enough stretch of highway, it would claw its way to over 140 mpg. But this wasn't just a hot engine in a rental car body. GM engineers went to work stiffening the chassis, recalibrating the suspension, adding transmission coolers, and fitting prototype 4-wheel disc brakes. Tires were upsized, gear ratios were shortened, and in a time before LED light bars and push bars, the Euro 3.4 carried its menace in silence. There were no decals, no spotlight, just steel wheels, a black grille, and a whisper of something unnatural beneath the surface. It was the perfect ghost car, and that's exactly what scared them. Because as testing began and prototypes were quietly issued to closed-course evaluation fleets, the car began to show its teeth in all the wrong ways. At speed, the Lumina had serious high-speed stability issues. Its aerodynamics, designed for family road trips, weren't up to the task of triple-digit pursuit duty. Over 120 mph, it developed lift in the rear. Over 130, it became twitchy, unstable. A sudden lane change or panic maneuver could send it into a tail-happy slide. The car was prone to snap oversteer, the kind that spins a sedan sideways into the median before the officer can even correct. Worse, the brakes, while upgraded, couldn't handle repeated stops from high speeds. During aggressive pursuit simulations, brake fade set in within minutes. In some cases, the pedal would go soft mid-chase, leaving the car hurtling forward with no way to rein it in. And then, it happened. Several prototypes crashed. One car reportedly lost control during a 130 mph run and flipped, taking out a dozen yards of crash barrier. Another skidded into a wall during a sudden avoidance maneuver. No fatalities, thankfully, but enough close calls that GM's legal department went cold with fear. What began as a daring performance project turned into a legal time bomb. GM knew what it had built, and they knew exactly how badly it could go wrong. The decision came swiftly and quietly. Kill it. Now. The program was terminated overnight. Every prototype was either recalled, dismantled, or repurposed. Test logs were destroyed. Internal memos vanished. Engineers were given non-disclosure warnings. Police departments that had expressed interest, Los Angeles, Houston, even parts of the Midwest, received sudden product reallocation notices. The car was never formally presented for duty. In fact, GM buried the entire project so thoroughly that no official press release was ever issued. Even today, former engineers, those who worked on the LQ1 cop car, barely speak of it. Many say it was wiped from internal records, and those who did drive it on the proving grounds recall it with a mixture of pride and fear, because what GM built was too fast, too dangerous, and too quiet. It had the heart of a race car in the shell of a fleet sedan. It was a ghost meant to haunt the left lane, until its own creators pulled it back into the shadows. Only a few photos exist. No surviving prototypes are known. The 1990 Luminina Euro 3.4 police interceptor is a footnote, a whisper, an urban legend among car historians and ex-cops alike. And if you ever see an old Luminina Euro parked in the back row of a decommissioned fleet yard, look closely, because somewhere deep in its DNA might be the last remaining trace of the most dangerous sleeper GM ever built, and then tried to erase. Let's take a deep dive into one of the strangest, most audacious chapters in Pontiac's history, the 1907 Firebird Type K. To fully appreciate just how wild this car was, you have to understand the world Pontiac was operating in during the late 70s. Muscle cars, once the kings of American roads, were under siege from every direction. Insurance rates were skyrocketing, emissions regulations were tightening like a noose, and the fuel crisis was forcing manufacturers to rethink everything. Yet Pontiac, always a brand that thrived on edge and attitude, still wanted to push boundaries, just maybe not in the way you'd expect. Now imagine sitting in a Pontiac executive meeting where someone proposes a car so bizarre it sounds like a prank, a four-door Firebird. Yes, the same Firebird known for its aggressive two-door coupe styling, its snarling V8 engines, and its rebellious, youthful spirit. All of that. But with four doors and enough interior space to rival a Cadillac. The goal? To lure in executives and buyers who craved muscle car style but needed practicality, back seats to ferry clients or family without sacrificing the iconic Pontiac flair. This idea led to the birth of the Firebird Type K. Pontiac stretched the familiar F-body platform, the bones beneath every Firebird and Camaro, far beyond its usual limits. To maintain a semblance of the Firebird's sleek silhouette, the designers took a wild gamble. They engineered suicide rear doors that opened backward. This was no mere styling quirk. It was a radical design choice, simultaneously daring and controversial, combining luxury car elements with raw muscle car aggression. But this wasn't just a two-door with extra doors tacked on. Every inch was reimagined to blend performance with comfort. The Type K carried a hefty V8 engine under its hood, one that promised the kind of grunt and growl Firebird fans expected. The front end retained the iconic split grille and aggressive hood scoops, but the entire body was elongated, the lines softened just enough to accommodate a spacious four-door cabin that could seat adults comfortably in the back. A rarity in muscle cars. On paper, it seemed like a perfect fusion. Muscle car styling with executive-class space and comfort. It could have been a new market niche, a way for Pontiac to evolve without losing its edge. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Pontiac's engineers and designers, those who had poured their hearts into preserving the brand's identity, rebelled. To them, the Type K was a betrayal, a car that turned its back on everything Pontiac muscle stood for. The car that betrays everything we stand for, they called it. And it wasn't just sour grapes. The Type K went against the very DNA that made the Firebird an icon. Raw attitude, aggressive stance, and a two-door coupe's sense of exclusivity and performance. The backlash inside Pontiac was fierce. The very people who had built the Firebird brand felt the Type K was a sellout to corporate demands, a dilution of the muscle car's soul in favor of boardroom practicality. Their message to upper management was clear. This car cannot live. And Pontiac's executives listened. Hard. Only Maya 2 Firebird Type Ks were ever built. Prototypes meant for internal review and testing. Once the backlash reached a boiling point, management issued a chilling order. Both prototypes were to be crushed, completely destroyed. But the erasure didn't stop there. Every piece of paper that documented the Type K's existence, design sketches, engineering notes, photographs, was ordered burned or shredded. Pontiac wanted the Firebird Type K wiped from history. For decades, it seemed to work. The Type K became a whispered legend, an impossible chapter erased from the official story. But as the 90s rolled around, some photos leaked. Blurry, grainy shots showing the elongated Firebird with its backward opening rear doors. The images sent shockwaves through muscle car communities. Fans were stunned. How could Pontiac hide something so bold? Despite the photos, Pontiac's silence was deafening. No acknowledgments, no official comment. The Type K was treated like a ghost, a secret too dangerous or embarrassing to admit. What made the Firebird Type K so fascinating was its status as a clash between cultures. It represented a moment when muscle car bravado met corporate pragmatism, and the two could not coexist. It was a muscle car with a back seat, but the price of that compromise was losing the spirit that made the Firebird roar. The Type K never reached showrooms. It never shredded tires on the open road. But it still lives on, tucked away in the shadows of automotive history as one of the strangest and most fascinating what-ifs. Imagine what could have happened if Pontiac had embraced it. A four-door muscle car with the heart of a Firebird in the space of a Cadillac. Would it have redefined the muscle car segment? Picture this. It's 1968, the golden era of muscle cars, and Ford is riding an unprecedented wave of triumph. Just a year earlier, the Ford GT40 had shocked the world by conquering the grueling 24 hours of Le Mans, shattering Ferrari's iron grip and staking America's claim on international endurance racing. The Mustang, already an icon of American muscle and youthful rebellion, was the darling of the streets and highways. Yet, in the quiet halls of Ford's advanced design studios, a small group of visionaries dared to dream something far beyond the ordinary pony car. They imagined a Mustang not bound by tradition, a Mustang that could compete on the same level as the very GT40 that had made Ford legendary. The result was the 1968 Ford Mustang Mach 2 Crown, a prototype so radical and forward-thinking that it seemed more fantasy than reality. Inspired heavily by the mid-engine design of the GT40 race car, the Mach 2 was Ford's attempt to blend the raw, aggressive spirit of a muscle car with the cutting-edge engineering of a supercar. At the heart of this beast was a Boss 302 V8 engine, a power plant revered for its combination of high-revving excitement and brutal torque. But unlike every Mustang before or since, this engine wasn't slung up front under a long hood. Instead, it was planted right behind the driver's seat, nestled midship like a racing thoroughbred. This gave the car a completely different feel, promising better weight distribution, sharper handling, and a level of performance muscle cars had only dreamed about. The exterior was equally stunning. Ford's designers melded the aggressive muscular lines Mustang fans adored with sleek, aerodynamic curves more reminiscent of Ferrari than anything American. The long, low profile featured a sharply sculpted nose, wide wheel arches, and a dramatic rear end designed to slice through the air with minimal resistance. The Mach 2 was both brutal and beautiful, a creature born from the clash of American muscle and European finesse. When test drivers finally took the Mach 2 out on the track and back roads, the car did not disappoint in raw speed. It was blisteringly fast, a car that could leave most competitors eating its dust. But speed alone was not enough. The Mach 2 proved terrifyingly unbalanced in real-world conditions. The mid-engine layout, while promising on paper, revealed serious challenges. Its handling was twitchy and unpredictable. The car was prone to snap oversteer in nervous moments at the edge of control. Drivers described it as a wild stallion that demanded respect and a master's touch. Beyond the raw driving dynamics, Ford's leadership faced deeper questions. Could the Mustang's loyal fan base, mostly accustomed to the front-engine, straightforward muscle formula, embrace such a radical change? Would the average Mustang buyer, who prized power, style, and value, accept a car that was essentially a mid-engine exotic with all the complexity and cost that entailed? The Mach 2 was expensive to build, requiring entirely new engineering, manufacturing processes, and servicing considerations. The business realities soon clashed with the dream. The Mach 2 was simply too ahead of its time. With the muscle car market already feeling the pressure of rising insurance rates, emissions regulations, and changing buyer tastes, Ford's executives concluded that the Mach 2 was a bridge too far. They decided to shelve the project, shutting down development almost as soon as it had begun. The prototype, a gleaming, one-of-a-kind Mustang, unlike any other, was quietly tucked away in Ford's private archives. It was hidden from the public eye, kept as a secret relic of what might have been. For decades, the Mach 2 remained a ghost, whispered about only in hushed tones among insiders and collectors lucky enough to glimpse rare photos or hear stories. What makes the Mach 2 so haunting is that it represents a true fork in the road for Ford and the Mustang legacy. Had it been released, the Mach 2 might have rewritten the muscle car rulebook, introducing mid-engine design and exotic performance to a market that had never seen it before. It could have positioned Ford at the forefront of performance innovation decades earlier than the modern supercars we see today. But instead, it became a forbidden fantasy, a mid-engine Mustang that exists only in dreams, sketches, and a few surviving photographs. Ford never officially acknowledged it, as if pretending it never existed might erase its radical ambitions. Yet for gearheads and Mustang fans, the Mach 2 is a symbol of bold innovation and daring vision that was crushed by the practicalities of the market and the conservatism of corporate decision-making. In the end, the 1968 Ford Mustang Mach 2 stands as a testament to what could have been. A car that bridged worlds, blending American muscle with exotic engineering, blazing a trail that Ford was too cautious to follow. It remains a tantalizing legend. Imagine the muscle car era's twilight in 1974, a time when the industry was grappling with rising insurance premiums, tightening emissions regulations, and an uneasy shift away from the raw horsepower wars that defined the previous decade. Yet, despite the tightening noose, some pockets of rebellion flickered in the shadows, untamed, unauthorized, and utterly fearless. Among these underground legends lurked a car so improbable, so explosively powerful, that it seemed like a myth whispered only among those who lived for speed and risk. The 1974 Plymouth Duster 26 Hemi drag pack dealer builds. Officially, Chrysler never sanctioned the 426 Hemi in the Duster. The 426 Hemi, the infamous elephant engine that had dominated NASCAR and drag strips since the early 60s, was reserved for the big, heavy-duty muscle cars like the Dodge Charger, Plymouth Roadrunner, and GTX. The Duster, a lightweight, compact A-body coupe, was designed for affordability and nimble street performance, typically underpowered compared to Mopar's high-horsepower giants. Its factory manuals made no mention of the Hemi, and corporate policy strictly forbade such reckless engine swaps. But the muscle car scene was never just about what the manual said. Behind the closed doors of select Mopar dealerships, often in more remote or aggressive racing markets, grease monkeys and dealers with a penchant for rule-breaking concocted a secret recipe. They took stock Plymouth Dusters, stripped them down, and bolted in fully built 426 Hemi engines paired with race-spec transmissions and suspension components. These were not casual upgrades, they were radical transformations that turned a humble compact into a street-legal dragster, a machine that could smoke anything it caught on the strip or street. These drag-packed dusters were beasts born of desperation and defiance, and the result was nothing short of explosive. The 426 Hemi's monstrous power, officially rated at 425 horsepower, but rumored to produce much more in these dealer-built cars, launched the Duster from zero to terror in moments. The car's frame, suspension, and drivetrain were often pushed beyond their engineering limits. Drive shafts snapped under the brutal torque, subframes bent and twisted as if made of tinfoil. Brakes and tires were overwhelmed by the sheer force trying to be harnessed. It was a car that demanded respect, a fragile weapon forged in fire. The fallout was swift and severe. Insurance companies refused to insure these mechanical monsters, labeling them too risky, too unstable, and outright dangerous. Their owners faced skyrocketing premiums, and many were forced to drive without coverage or abandon their prized cars altogether. Local law enforcement caught wind of these wild machines and began cracking down aggressively, impounding many of the Dusters when spotted on the streets or racing illegally. Chrysler's corporate response was ruthless and unambiguous. Internal memos circulated warning dealerships that any further 426 Hemi installs in A-body platforms would be met with harsh penalties. Dealers caught facilitating such swaps risked losing factory support and their official status. The company quietly bought back as many of these illegal Hemi Dusters as it could, crushing most into oblivion to erase any trace of their existence. In official Mopar history, the 426 Hemi Duster never existed. The company erased it like a dangerous secret, a rogue chapter that contradicted its carefully controlled muscle car narrative. Mopar would never speak of them in brochures, advertising, or public forums. If you mention the drag-pack Duster to the right crowd, you get hushed tones and knowing glances. But otherwise, the car remains a shadowy ghost in the Mopar universe. Yet, for muscle car historians, collectors, and underground enthusiasts, the 426 Hemi Duster stands as one of the wildest and most forbidden legends of all time. It embodies the defiance and reckless spirit that made the muscle car era so electrifying. The relentless pursuit of power, no matter the amount or consequence. These cars weren't built for comfort or longevity. They were built to dominate the drag strip, to rule the street, and to burn rubber until they broke in pieces. The Plymouth Duster 426 Hemi drag pack dealer builds are a symbol of raw, unfiltered American muscle, illicit, dangerous, and nearly erased from history. They were never meant to exist, but they tore through the limits imposed on them, leaving scars and stories that still echo through the Mopar world today. A true outlaw muscle car, buried in the shadows but never forgotten by those who worship horsepower and the rebellious spirit of speed. In the landscape of late 1980s performance cars, where turbocharging was just beginning to shake up the muscle car world, Carroll Shelby teamed up with Dodge to create something truly extraordinary and wildly ambitious. The odd 1989 Shelby CSX VNT wasn't just another turbocharged pony car. It was a cutting-edge experiment, a bold leap into the future that promised to solve the most frustrating problem of turbo engines: lag. But the road to innovation was rocky, and the CSX VNT's story is one of brilliance, complexity, and quiet downfall. Carroll Shelby, already a legend in automotive performance, wanted to push turbocharging beyond the limits anyone thought possible. Traditional turbos were notorious for their lag, the delay between pressing the gas pedal and feeling the surge of power. Shelby envisioned a car where boost came instantly, smoothly, and power flowed like a perfectly timed symphony. The answer was the variable nozzle turbocharger, VNT. A technology so advanced it seemed to come from a sci-fi dream. This variable nozzle turbo was no ordinary piece of hardware. Unlike standard turbos with fixed geometry, The VNT could adjust its turbine's internal vanes on the fly, changing the exhaust gas flow dynamically to optimize boost across all RPM ranges. At low speeds, the vanes would narrow to spool the turbo quickly, eliminating lag. At high speeds, they would open to prevent overboost and maintain efficiency. This meant the engine could deliver smooth, immediate power from idle to redline, a revolutionary idea for 1989. But such cutting-edge technology came with a price. Underneath its sleek Shelby stripes and aggressive bodywork, the CSX VNT housed a turbo system controlled by one of the earliest onboard computers dedicated to managing boost pressure and vane position. This electronic system was groundbreaking but delicate and easily confused by imperfect conditions. Mechanics and tuners, used to simpler turbo setups, struggled to diagnose and maintain the complex system. The VNT's sensitivity meant that any malfunction or improper tuning could lead to serious problems. Worst of all, the turbo system had a tendency to overboost, pushing more pressure into the engine than it could safely handle. When drivers stomped on the gas, the turbo sometimes delivered a sudden spike in boost that caused violent detonation, also known as engine knock. These uncontrolled explosions inside the cylinders could destroy pistons, rods, and other engine components in seconds. The result was a high-performance car that was as temperamental and unforgiving as it was fast. The problems didn't stop at mechanical reliability. The Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, had growing concerns about the erratic emissions from the CSX VNT's variable turbo setup. The turbo's constantly shifting boost levels and combustion patterns made exhaust emissions unpredictable and difficult to control within the strict standards of the day. The regulator's unease added another layer of difficulty to what was already a complicated engineering challenge. Dodge found itself at a crossroads. The Shelby CSX VNT was a technological marvel that could change the performance landscape forever, yet it was also a liability. Complex, unreliable in the hands of many owners, and a regulatory headache. The company quietly pulled the plug after producing only around 500 units, a minuscule number for a production Shelby. Rather than celebrating the car's innovation, Dodge suppressed the project, avoiding promotion and marketing. Even more tellingly, Dodge took the unusual step of buying back many of the worst-performing CSX VNTs from customers to avoid further damage to the car's reputation. These recalls were done quietly, without fanfare, almost as if the company wanted to erase this experimental chapter from public memory. The variable nozzle turbo technology that the CSX VNT pioneered would not reappear in American cars for many years, far behind the curve compared to Europe and Japan, where VNT turbos were being refined and embraced. Today, the Shelby CSX VNT remains an enigma, a rare and misunderstood gem that sits quietly in the annals of automotive history. It's a car that dared to push technological boundaries at a time when the industry and market were not yet ready. A machine that embodies the tension between innovation and practicality, between bleeding-edge performance and everyday reliability. For enthusiasts who appreciate engineering, audacity, and the complex evolution of forced induction, the CSX VNT is a prized piece of Shelby lore. It's a glimpse into a moment when Carroll Shelby's relentless quest for speed collided with the dawn of computer-controlled turbocharging, a marriage of raw muscle car passion and high-tech ambition that ultimately proved too advanced for its own good. In the mid-1970s, as muscle cars were being squeezed out by mounting emissions regulations, insurance hikes, and shifting market demands, General Motors made a last-ditch effort to build something extraordinary for law enforcement. A true pursuit machine designed to dominate the streets and highways with brute force and relentless speed. This was the founded in 1975 Chevrolet Caprice XP94 454 Police Interceptor prototype. An experimental cruiser that combined raw muscle car power with the size and presence of a full-size sedan, forged specifically to meet the needs of high-speed police chases. The story of the XP94 is one of ambition, engineering brilliance, and a tragic collision with the harsh realities of a changing automotive era. At a time when muscle cars were losing their roar, GM engineers refused to give up. They took the familiar, dependable Caprice already a favorite among police departments for its size and comfort, and transformed it into a thunderous pursuit beast. The centerpiece was a detuned, but no less monstrous, LS6 454 cubic-inch big block V8. The same engine that made the Chevelle SS a drag-strip legend now lurked under the XP94's hood, ready to launch the massive cruiser into the stratosphere of performance. But this was no mere transplant job. The XP94's chassis was beefed up with reinforced frame rails and upgraded suspension components, all engineered to handle the punishing torque and high-speed stresses that would come with police pursuit duty. The cooling system was overhauled to prevent the engine from overheating during extended runs at full throttle, and heavy-duty brakes were installed to ensure the car could stop on a dime after screaming down the interstate at speeds that challenged the very idea of a police cruiser. The vision was clear: build a cop car that could outrun and outlast anything else on the road, including the legendary 440 Mopars that ruled the streets in muscle car heyday. The XP94 was supposed to be the ultimate law enforcement weapon, a muscle car wrapped in the familiar package of a Caprice, designed to give officers the power and durability they needed to keep up with the fastest criminals. But just as GM's engineers were putting the finishing touches on this powerful creation, the weight of new government regulations came crashing down. The Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, tightening emission standards at an unprecedented rate, became the XP94's undoing. When the prototypes went through emissions testing, disaster struck. The massive 454 engine, even when detuned, belched thick, choking smoke in volumes so extreme, it was as if the car was literally on fire. One GM tester dryly remarked that the car smoked more than a tire fire, a vivid and unforgettable image that encapsulated the severity of the problem. The EPA deemed the prototypes completely unfit for road use, unable to meet even the most lenient emissions requirements. This failure was catastrophic. The XP94, a symbol of muscle car persistence, was abruptly killed. GM immediately scrapped the project, crushing every prototype but one and destroying the build sheets and internal documentation to erase its existence from official history. The lone surviving XP94 is rumored to reside deep within a private GM facility basement in Warren, Michigan, a ghostly relic of an era on the brink of extinction, locked away from public view and lost to time. The XP94's story highlights a pivotal moment in automotive history: the collision between raw, unbridled horsepower and the harsh realities of environmental regulation. It was the muscle car era's last desperate stand, a full-size cruiser packing a heart of pure, explosive power, designed to outrun the competition and set new standards for police performance, only to be strangled by the era's unstoppable regulatory wave. To this day, the 1975 Chevrolet Caprice XP94 remains a fascinating what could have been. It embodies the spirit of American muscle in its purest form: big, loud, and unapologetically powerful, trapped behind the walls of government mandates and corporate caution. It's a secret legend whispered about in collector circles, a hidden gem that reminds us how close we came to having a muscle-powered police interceptor that could have changed the face of law enforcement forever. The XP94 stands as a powerful testament to the muscle car's last hurrah, a fleeting moment when GM dared to build the ultimate muscle cruiser, only to see it crushed beneath the weight of progress. It's a lost chapter of raw American automotive passion, buried in secrecy but never forgotten by those who dream of the day when muscle ruled the streets without compromise.